Hi, everyone. My name is David Fulford, and I'm the CEO of IPAC. And thank you very much for joining us today for our new professional event that is focused on learning, engaging, and growing. Now, we have over 600 people registered from across Canada who I know will come and go throughout the day, as I'm sure they're all very busy with their work events. But we're really pleased that you could join us. Now, today's event is really going to provide you with an opportunity to connect and to learn from leaders across Canada, which we hope will help you with your career development and growth. Now, here at IPAC, we have 18 regions across our country, and it would be really nice if you could just enter into the chat feature now and to let us know which region you're participating from. So thank you. Now, we also want to make sure that we create an environment that is comfortable for everyone to learn and to ask questions. And so really today, the key that we need from you is to ask us questions. Our best events are the ones where we have a conversation that goes back and forth. So please use the chat feature as we go throughout the day during our sessions to ask our presenters questions. And we built in time for that, but we also know that it just makes for a better two-way dialogue. So this is an example where IPAC is trying to create a space for you to learn and to develop throughout your career journey. And we also made the decision to make this free because I heard from a lot of new professionals that it is challenging to get approval for learning and development opportunities. So we hope that this is a good opportunity, and we really look forward to your feedback around that. Now, we also encourage you to please post your attendance today on social media using the hashtag IPACNP2022, and Aaron is now going to share that with everyone, and we encourage you to please let people know through social media that you are participating. Now, before we begin, I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our offices reside on traditional, treaty, and unceded territories as part of Turtle Island, which are still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. With participants joining virtually from coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the many lands of all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We encourage you to learn and acknowledge the land on which you work and live. Now, this conference would not be possible without the support of our event sponsor, NOUS. And on behalf of IPAC, I wish to thank NOUS for their continued commitment to public service excellence in Canada. And a little later on today, you'll have a chance to meet Kelly Rowe from NOUS. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We'd like to know how we did. So please take a moment at the end today to fill out the survey. And if you do complete the survey, you will go into a draw to win a one-year membership for IPAC. And finally, and this is the fun event that I hope you all will take advantage of, and that's the networking. So at the end of today at 4 o'clock, we're now going to provide an opportunity for you to enter the platform wonder.me. And at that time, Aaron will explain it. And it's really neat. You get a chance to meet people from across Canada. And we've set up different rooms by topics. One's on pets, one's on policy. You decide where to go and you can move, and that way you can meet people just like you would at a conference. So let's begin our conversation about advancing your career right now. Our first keynote speaker guest is Enyinnah Okere, who is a 40 under 40 recipient and currently Chief Operations Officer of the Edmonton Police Services Community Safety and Wellbeing Bureau. And joining him to moderate today's session is IPAC Toronto Region's new professional chair, Khadeja Elsibai, who works for the federal government. In this conversation, we'll explore what it takes to excel in your career and how to navigate the world of work with honesty and integrity. And as I mentioned earlier, the key for us is the questions that you ask. So please remember to enter those. And with that, Khadeja, over to you.
Thank you very much, David Fulford. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our keynote session with Enyinnah Okere. We're pleased to have you all joining us today from across the country for a very interesting discussion with a very esteemed public servant. I'd like to start off by saying that I am joining you from Toronto, which is the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Dish with the One Spoon. And I encourage you all to acknowledge and to reflect on the lands upon which you are situated. Enyinnah, I'd like to start off by asking you. You are currently the Chief Operating Officer of Community Safety and Wellbeing for the Edmonton Police Force, and you're 35 years old. How did your journey start off in the public service?
Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the country. Thank you very much for having me. So it was an interesting journey, and I think for most of you who are going to be going down your own career journeys, you're going to be having a lot of moments of how did I get here? What steps did I take to get here? For me, it actually started out in public service in Saskatchewan. So I'm here in Edmonton, Alberta, Treaty 6 territory, but I started out my professional career working at the legislature in Regina, Saskatchewan. And my focus was, I would say at the age of 22, I did not have a focus. I just finished my political science degree. I was thinking maybe I'd go to law school, because if you are someone who grew up like me, I immigrated from Nigeria. My mother just told me you can be three things. One of it is being a doctor, the other being a lawyer, and the third option is being a disappointment. So I chose number three, I guess. And so I started working at the Ledge. I took political philosophy. So I really thought everything I was doing to get into my professional life was going to be leading to law school. So in terms of like even partisan or party politics or understanding how government works, I wasn't interested in that in school. My focus was more on how people thought, the kind of the theories behind how maybe the world moved, but not really the mechanics of passing a bill or how we're going to move policy from one place to another. So I got into the legislature, and it was just kind of a culture shock. You go from school where you're a collegiate athlete, you have things kind of structured for you, and now you're 22 in a building where a lot of things are moving at once. There's no one to really hold your hand. There's no one to really kind of guide you, and you have to kind of almost sink or swim. So that's really how I got started in public service. I was able, though I can't swim in real life, I was able to figure it out in the actual professional sphere. Navigated that. I ended up being director of research within the government caucus office, and then held multiple chief of staff roles. The first one being chief of staff to the Minister of Corrections and Policing, and that was my first real intersection or introduction to law enforcement. And then from there, I ended up moving into the bureaucratic side as the executive director of strategic initiatives and the evaluation of the government of Saskatchewan, who at that time the ministry was led by Deputy Minister Dale McPhee, who was a former police chief. He got recruited to be police chief in Edmonton, and somehow I ended up here working in Edmonton in law enforcement. And that's kind of the very bizarre route for me to be speaking to you folks right here.
All that. So we do have here in your bio that you have spearheaded your current organization's LGBTQ plus apology. You have led the Edmonton Public Services commitment to action to supporting racialized communities. You lead the entire community well-being and safety portfolio. What does that all involve? And how is your identity as a Black male integral to all of that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I came here in 2019, my first actual kind of foray into local policing. And I was still kind of really trying to figure out if my fob worked and kind of getting around even the city. Then in 2020, and my portfolio at that time was based on strategy, so directing the organization's strategy, as well as equity and inclusion, and making sure those two move in concert. So 2020 came along, and I'm still I'm a year into, I don't know if we have some folks not on mute, or I'm getting some feedback. Is anyone else getting that?
Yes.
Okay, so we're like 3 years into this. This got to be some kind of fine for.
If I could just ask everyone to please mute. We're just going to have our two speakers unmuted. So if everybody else could mute, because we can hear a conversation that's going on. So if everyone could just mute, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, 2020 happens, and all of a sudden the world is turned upside down, not only with COVID-19, but with a historic social justice movement focusing on addressing systemic racism. Now being in an interesting place that law enforcement was at the kind of intersection of that, and myself having to be honest, be introspective in terms of, whoa, okay, this is an interesting place in history to be in right now. What do I want to do with this opportunity? So I am very fortunate that I work with I have incredible colleagues who were wanted to listen to the conversations that we were having in Community Edmonton here. We had over 5,000 people marching, wanting to talk about law enforcement, really policing, and just the system as a whole. What could we do to be part of the solution rather than being perpetually at loggerheads? You watch, I was able to look at kind of jurisdictions across the country or jurisdictions in the United States, and they were more combative. Folks wanted to be more combative in terms of having those kind of power discussions. And for me, having to also always live in my identity while trying to make a positive impact, I wanted to find out who the change leaders were going to be within community and within the service, and how do we bring them together to do what we did call a commitment to action. And what that was the largest engagement we've ever done as a service of 18 months of meeting nightly with different racialized communities or not-for-profits or community CBOs that serve racialized communities and other equity-seeking groups to find out what can we do that's tangible, that you can actually see actioned, and how do we make sure that we have that feedback, build out a roadmap that has been directed by community. One of the biggest things that I try to focus on is giving people power to be able to navigate within the state. And for me, like I said, I immigrated to Canada here in the 90s. We come from like a family that we didn't know, like when I was growing up here, I didn't know how to interact with the state. I didn't know what options were available. It's just you go to school and just try to stay out of trouble. And that's all well and good, but there's something different about feeling like you have your voice heard and you actually have agency within the city that you live in, and that voice is valued. And that's what we wanted to be able to give to community, that if we're going to be able to police within community and do it at the consent of the community, that means you have to have a voice in terms of where we're going. And that means we have shared ownership too. So it can't just be a pointing of fingers, because this is a plan that we've laid out together. So we're in the tent together, win or lose. So that's really what I was thinking in terms of how I was going to navigate, and how myself and my colleagues and the chief were going to navigate these next few years, because we could either spend time fighting on Twitter, or we can understand that people are coming with real lived experiences, and so are officers, and what are we actually trying to solve, rather than who's going to get the upper hand in some kind of public debate. So that was my focus there. Prior to that, though, and it was great. You mentioned the LGBTQ apology. We had a bit of a sordid history with the LGBTQ community that we're still working on to this day, and our chief. Our chief delivered an apology, would have been early 2020, apologizing, saying we were wrong, and we were going to do better, and we wanted to build a roadmap as to how we can start to rebuild that community trust. And something like that was very important, because there's something very validating of hearing someone say, you did experience this, I'm validating those experiences, and we were wrong to do that, we know better, and how are we going to build from that? So there is a lot of community engagement that happens within the work that I do, but the bureau that I oversee, so that's the equivalent to, I am a civilian because I'm not an officer, deputy chief, That bureau is strictly functioned on how do we work with community agencies to try to divert appropriate people away from the justice system. So we have some people in every city that are struggling through the throes of mental health issues, addictions, and there is a real intersection with crime that happens there. But we don't necessarily believe a jail cell is going to be the best place to be addressing that. So how do we now partner with agencies that can work with us to be able to address how do we divert the people within the system who the system is designed for, but it's far too complicated. How do we get them to get the resources to meet their unmet needs that are disproportionately pushing them into unwanted contact with the police? And if we can truly do that and integrate our system with other agencies, whether it be health, whether it be more of the social services, that's actually going to make a safer community. So that's the work that I'm leading now.
Amazing work, and definitely very important work. You spoke about consultations, you spoke about engaging racialized communities. Do you have some tips on how to build trust so that people can trust government when you're doing these consultations and when you're engaging with them?
Tips is I think this is universal. If you say you're going to do something, do it. So I think whether it be this, I'll say the state in general, so it could be government, it could be policing. Doing the consultation isn't the exercise. The exercise is making sure that you do kind of what you commit to from said consultation, because communities, especially racialized communities, and I think about just indigenous communities in this country, there has to be consultation fatigue. Like I would hate to come to a place like, we've already told you what we needed. Why are you coming here to make a show of talking about it? So it's being very, very specific in what you can do, what you can work to do, and following through with those commitments. So for us, the reason we went out with the commitment to action is that the ideas that we sourced from the community, we would be able to actually follow through with this. So I'll give you an example, and this was the one that's very personal to me. We had a meeting with what was called the Hoyo Collective, and the Hoyo Collective is a group of Somali mothers here in Edmonton, and they have lost their kids to homicide, so violence, shootings, etc. And these are grieving mothers, and these are mothers that English is not the native tongue. We were able to hold a meeting in our consultations with myself, the chief, and a couple of my deputy chief colleagues, and these mothers, and had a translator. And they were able to speak directly to us in terms of their grief. They're able to speak directly to us in terms of kind of what they need and the gaps they're seeing within the system. And we were able to speak back to them. For someone like me, if we talked about kind of intersectionality, that was something that I never would have imagined or thought about growing up. But what was important from that was one of the things that they asked for is, and it was so simple, someone to be able to communicate with them through an investigation. So we're in a place that you can't have homicide detectives also kind of soothing and providing kind of victim services to families while trying to investigate at the same time. So we actually created new positions to be able to actually communicate and connect with these families so that they don't feel alone and in the wind when they're going through the worst possible thing anyone could imagine. And yet there's no one from the kind of the state or the service to be able to bring them along. It's one thing to have conversations about those things. It's another thing for them to see a real life human being, that a job has been created based on what their thoughts were and their grief, and something to be able to help the community. So it's whether it be engaging with any racialized community, or engaging with colleagues, or engaging with your friends or your partner, whatever that is, doing what you say you're going to do is going to be the underlying, that's going to underpin everything I'm going to say over this conversation, because that's actually what builds trust, not just kind of words.
It's following up on what you say and following through with it. Thank you for that tip. So you said that you started off in Regina, you worked in many positions there, you eventually moved to Edmonton, you're 35 years old, chief operating officer in the Edmonton Police Force. What challenges did you experience along the way?
So as you were saying that, I thought you were talking about someone else, because it feels surreal to be here. but the challenges are that perpetual feeling, and it's probably more of an internal challenge that I'd like to speak about than anything else, that perpetual feeling of kind of being out of place and starting to navigate. And I think part of that speaks to almost the immigrant experience. And it depends on when you do come to this country, but coming here, like, so in Nigeria, I never knew I was Black. Only coming to Canada, like in Nigeria, I thought I was Nigerian or Igbo, actually by tribe, not anything else. Coming here, then you're aware of that kind of difference. And difference isn't a bad thing, but it's how you navigate yourself in recognizing said difference and being able to utilize that and having space to utilize it. So my biggest challenges with every position is imposter syndrome from the first job to where I am right now. That, oh my goodness, they're trusting me to do what? And day by day, like, should I be here? Should I be having these conversations? And in fact, even doing something like this right now, I'm like, hey, why are they trying to hear from me? But at the same time, preparing myself to be able to navigate through the tough things. I think when you grow up, whether it be as an immigrant or someone who wants to achieve, you fall into that almost destination fallacy. So for me, I thought if I made it to a certain position, I was going to be happy. And this was very early in my career. And I got there and I looked around like, oh, there's a new goalpost. And there's that destination fallacy that you end up falling into, and it ends up being a rat race, as opposed to thinking about what it is that I need to be able to feel secure, empowered within whatever position that I'm in. So whether it was a previous position or sitting here as chief operations officer, mastery of self has been the biggest challenge that I've had and will probably continue to have as I navigate my career, because there's no real roadmap for this. And especially for those of you who are going to be you're new to your careers. And I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of high flyers because you're spending time doing this in professional development, meaning like you're seeking to get better. You may hit those milestones. And the thing that I think about the most is, what do I do when I get there? And how do I prepare myself for kind of the emotional and mental strain or strain of achieving that success and now being able to regulate myself within it. Does that make sense?
It definitely does make sense. Are there any things that you specifically do to, regulate yourself emotionally and prepare yourself for those moments when you're the only 35-year-old in the room around probably 50-year-old?
60, yeah. I think about it, like, I've had people tell me that they have socks that are older than me, and I believe them. Like, in terms of colleagues, I think humility and vulnerability go a long way for being able to, we'll talk about just survival and being effective, and then I'll get back to regulation. I'm not going to be one to talk to, like, you get into a position like this, everyone that you work with or works for you is going to know way more than you about everything that they're doing. So there's no utility in me coming to be the directive type A, like, oh, you're going to do what I say because, I'm the boss and et cetera. That doesn't mean anything. And it's even more seductive to do that in the paramilitary organization, where that's actually easier to do that. Hey, the boss has dictated this. That doesn't go anywhere. For me, I know what it is that I know. So over these last 3 years, we've been having a lot of conversations and navigating the intersection between law enforcement and even just the politicization of law enforcement. Well, I actually came from working in politics. There's some utility for me there. I'm able to speak and actually provide a perspective as to how we navigate some of these things, while I'm not going to speak on how to do a check stop or how to do an investigation. So it was being humble enough, or maybe not humble enough, being very realistic in terms of, I don't know everything, so I have to trust. I have to trust the people that I work with and that work with me, that they also we have a clear goal and they have our best like collective intentions in mind. Because if it was trying to be like controlling everything, I would drive myself into an unhealthy state and I would be wildly ineffective, which would be then detrimental not only to me, but to anyone who's going to be coming after me that could be under 40, a civilian, and wanting to be in a position like this, because that is the quiet pressure that all of you who are going to be younger or outliers are going to face, in terms of you not only speaking for you, whether you want to or not, you are going to be the prototype of, or the archetype of, what folks may think of when they think of someone in this position of how do we change when they think of someone within this position and like, oh, okay, you know what? Someone that fits this archetype can do this. So I have to be very respectful and cognizant of how I navigate situations and how I work with others, because that responsibility doesn't just fall on me if there are folks who are interested in doing this that are going to come after me. Now, in terms of the personal regulation, I think it's like I have an incredible life that I talk to about a lot of these things, reading and spending time really doing introspective work in terms of what my desires are and how much of them are intrinsically motivated and how much of them are motivated extrinsically. And what I mean by that is due to what I believe the desired state for an executive should be, look like, act like. And if things aren't intrinsically motivated, I need to be able to check that, regulate that, and look at what I'm doing to make sure that I'm prepared for the success or failure, or just kind of the tribulations that come with positions like this as I'm continuing to navigate my career.
That is some very, very good advice. So thank you very much for sharing that. In your still relatively short career, what is one big lesson that you have learned that you would like to share with everyone?
Vulnerability is a superpower. It is like the courage to be open. The courage to be open goes so far with people who authentically want to see you, and more importantly, they want to be seen. And the work is always going to be the work when you're working with people. Like, it's whatever briefing note has to get done or whatever cabinet decision, those things are going to come and go. But if you are open and treat people with kindness and do what you say you're going to do, like growing up, like your parents would tell you things like that, and you're like, okay, what do you know, mom? Like, yeah, like what have you. But there's a reason these rules and sayings have lasted for so long, because it's true. Treating people with kindness and respect is not only just a great moral imperative, it's actually a superpower, because you know what? People will want to work with you. People will want to work for you. One of the biggest things that I've learned is no one actually, and I don't want to say they don't care about the quality of work. The quality of work, that's really only going to be within a bandwidth. When you're working in an organization of 3,000 people, 4,000 people, that's going to be within bandwidth. But what people remember is how you make them feel. So for people who want to be in whatever organization you're in, want to be in those meetings that when decisions are being made, you know what people think of? Hey, I like Khadeja. Let's, bring her in. Let's make sure that then let's navigate whatever the work is going to be. Or, I like David. Bring him in. Let's make sure we're doing this. People will always viscerally feel how you make them feel through the work more than anything that more than a lot of other things. So you can have a lot of great ideas, but if people don't want to do them with you, you're just a person walking alone. So kindness, following through what you say you're going to do is if you do nothing else, you'll end up exactly where you're supposed to be. And I hope and trust that you'll be fulfilled while doing it. Kindness and following through.
Kindness, following through, courage, vulnerability. Thank you so much for sharing all this. We have here, one of the questions that we have from the audience is, how do we create, a workplace that is inclusive to, to members of equity-seeking communities, that they can feel included and that they can feel supported?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think it's a question that or a topic that a lot of organizations are struggling with right now and fighting with. And I think it's a worthy fight. But for me, I think, once again, a foundation of respect and kindness and a culture of that and building that is key. So as a world, we have advanced so far in the last 20 years in terms of even our collective awareness of like racialized issues or thoughts, that if you lead with kindness and respect for others, that opens the door, and that has to be a culture that's ingrained within your organization. One thing, and we don't have time for this, but I will just open the door, is separating the idea of diversity from representation and clarity on what it is that you're trying to address. So when I say representation, I do mean, if we're speaking about how many Black people we have in the workplace, or LGBTQ2S plus, or anything like that, if that's what you're talking about, then be clear about that within your workplace. If you're speaking about diversity, diversity is also bigger in terms of whether it be different schools of thought, whether it like we're not grounding that in solely protected grounds. I say all that because when now trying to bring that message to a wider audience in terms of your organization, they need to understand the utility of why it is that we are doing these things, further than it is just simply a moral imperative, because it is. But if we're speaking about that, then I think we have a responsibility of clarity, of, if we're talking about inclusivity, we know what will and will not be tolerated within our organization. If we're talking about diversity, we're speaking about diversity because this will help us get to a specific end. And I think it's important for leadership to be able to have those conversations so you don't confuse your workforce, and then we get into discussions about affirmative action. Or the thing that I struggle with and I think about is that we're doing diversity for the sake of diversity, and if we don't actually present the conversation of why we're doing this, there's now an expectation because we have a Black person at the table, or a female at the table, or someone from the LGBTQ community at the table. Poof, magically, this magical individual is going to make our workforce more productive. Not the idea that having different perspectives, different skill sets to a team now gives you the ability to see things from different perspectives that you wouldn't have seen if you had a homogenous group of any kind, but you're able to now iterate and build for a future that you couldn't because you had way too similar parts, if that makes sense. So inclusivity, focusing in on culture, focusing in on kindness, respect, and making sure that there's accountability there, like accountability behind inclusivity. So for me, when I, like with my superintendents and like their performance reviews, down the line, all the way to the constable level, I have within performance reviews that what are your performance goals for the next year? Bring back examples of what you've done just within your little corner to make our bureau more inclusive. And I think from leadership, these are actual mechanisms that you can do for our organization, from now the deputy chief level, getting down to the staff sergeant, and we'll hopefully get to the sergeant level. Even promotional examples, more than just specific competencies of policing competencies. You can tell I'm a civilian because I did the air quotes. We can also add questions about inclusivity, and we have inclusivity and EDI. So you can bed that into the organization, but you also need to have a culture that is looking for that and understands the value of being inclusivity and increasing diversity.
Just focusing in on inclusivity, the clarity of objectives, creating a culture that supports inclusivity and diversity, and being clear on what we want to do in our organizations and what exactly we want to achieve.
You said everything I said in 10 minutes, in 30 seconds. I appreciate you.
No worries. Thank you, Enyinnah. One of our attendees is wondering, how do you handle small p politics when they get into the way of doing the right thing? So many people have all kinds of ideas. Sometimes folks have their own interests. Lots of politics goes around in our organizations, and things don't always go the way you want them to do. How do you handle that?
Yeah, we navigate it all the time, but I would say that you need to do what you feel is the right thing. And that is a very simple, it might seem like a nothing answer, but I'll kind of give you, hope, a little bit of perspective. You're going to be in an organization and work in a world that is rapidly changing. So the person that might be your boss today, the person you tick off by falling into those games and not acting, kind of leading with integrity, they might be their boss in 2 years. This happens all the time here. If we are going to be spending our times chasing the small p and getting into like the little gossip, that doesn't make you better. That doesn't make you a more functional employee. And every day you're engaged in that stuff, like just a rock on the beach, the water is just going to be continuing ebbing and ebbing at your integrity. Making sure that you are doing what you feel like to be the right thing, because it's a very long game. It might feel like, and I'm saying that being here, but still being very early in my career, it might feel like whatever little piddly thing you're dealing with at the time really matters, but I can assure you it doesn't. The world changes very rapidly, but in that changing world, who do you want to be within it? Because that's going to be the constant. You're still going to have to navigate yourself and pick up the positive habits of having integrity, that regardless of what is going on, like I said earlier, of people want you to be in the room, what kind of recall do you want them to have of you? Someone who engaged in that kind of crap, or someone who was able to stay above the fray? And I say this speaking from experience in terms of being on hiring panels and hearing the discussions after different candidates have gone through for promotions, that, oh no, this person showed integrity from this instance, whatever the situation was. And this is the kind of leadership we want here, as opposed to, oh, this person plays all kinds of games. So it's very tempting to look at what's in front of you, but the biggest thing is look at the long game and who you want to be as you navigate that.
Look at the long game and who you want to be as you navigate that. I like that advice. So our audience is wondering, what do you do to support your professional development? Any specific strategies you're learning? Any specific readings that you do?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading, and it's like I thought more about whether going back to school, and personally speaking, it's I'm about to bare my soul to 234 people. Personally speaking, the reasons I was thinking about that was, okay, as I continue to navigate my career, do more letters make me more competitive for what it is that whatever comes next for me? And I was wondering why it is, like, is this, like I said earlier, is this an intrinsic motivation or is it extrinsic? And for me, what I was really looking for is knowledge and to be secure in myself, as opposed to letters that now I'm giving back so I'm giving power to other people looking at my resume. It's like, okay, this person is worthy. So I've been doing reading on things that interest me, and in terms of like even my work, but things that interest me outside of that. And what I've been trying to build is, this is going to sound strange, but I think about it, someone speaking about almost like our immune system. Our immune system, we take in so many different bacteria and pathogens every day, but if you have a functioning immune system, you don't know about it because it's addressing that. I'm doing reading now to build up a better personal, mental, spiritual immune system to navigating professional life. Meaning that I actually don't know what's going to be coming at me. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I was an executive director in the government of Saskatchewan, and my view was, am I going to be how do I work to be an ADM? Now I'm in policing, but what have I done to prepare myself for that success? And that's really the biggest thing I hope that folks here leave with is, what are you doing to prepare yourself for the success that you're working for? So for me, it is reading. It's reading about desires. It's reading about even just like psychology, so I can prepare myself for anything that's coming my way, as opposed to thinking that I have to chase this degree or doctorate in order to give power back to people. So getting back to regulation and mastery of self, you're going to be going on a long journey. And I used to think of BA, MA, PhD, that was going to be the armor and the tool that was going to help me get through everything. That doesn't matter. That's like, it matters, but it doesn't matter like we think we do. The things that I see that matter the most, once again, how you treat people, how you navigate within a workplace, but how you regulate and master yourself, because that's really going to affect, like I said, how you treat people and how you navigate. So reading, personal development leads to professional development. And I'm saying that within a sphere that, I mean, if you're a doctor or a scientist, I hope you're always reading about medical stuff, please. But if you are someone like me, you can probably find a bit of a balance. But the education dilemma, that's not going to be the panacea, that just like the destination fallacy of a certain salary or a certain position, that's not going to be the panacea that you're looking for if you're not secure in oneself.
Indeed, personal mastery leads to professional mastery. Always looking at that intrinsic versus what is extrinsic.
Mhm.
I really like that advice, and I really, really appreciate it. Are there any specific books that you have been reading and you can recommend?
Yes, two that really changed things for me. The first one, and I think it was by Liz Wiseman, is called Multipliers. And it is how the best leaders get the best from others. I'm just going to look at it. Yeah, how the best leaders make everyone around them better. And so I was speaking to a professional coach 3 years ago, and I said, I thought I was really strange, because like I didn't want to have a super large team or anything like that, and I didn't know what my function was within even an organization. Like I knew what the line item function was, but like the talent that I value I could bring. And I said, all I really want is to be able to work with really cool and smart people who are smarter than me. We can get some cool things done, and then they leave and they do that for others. And I don't want to empire build. I'll have spheres of influence all across wherever they go. That's the real kind of empire. She's like, oh, like a multiplier. I'm like, no, I don't like math, so I don't know what you're talking about. But then she actually showed me the book, and it was so foundational in terms of how good leadership not only brings the best out of others, but the cascading kind of effect that comes from that. And that's very important, that I can either bring you up or diminish your shine. And there are some things that you can be doing accidentally to be able to diminish people's whether it be potential, motivation, engagement. And I think we've all had leaders that do both. So taking the time to read that was very important. The other book was called The Speed of Trust, and by Stephen Covey. And trust is, and says, the one thing that changes everything. And it was an interesting point, whether it be trust in relationships, trust in professional relationships, that there's something called the trust tax. And what that is like, if trust is a barrier, it takes so much longer to do anything. So whether it be with your parents and I want to go out, if they trust you to do the right thing, you're like, okay, yeah, go on. If they don't, you're for a negotiation. Just like if your colleagues or direct reports trust you, you can just give the direction and we go. As opposed to if you're always at a fight. So there is a utility, an actual utility in terms of speed, effectiveness, and efficiency to build trusting relationships with people around you first and have that be the foundation, as opposed to any kind of MBA theory. Those things matter, but without trust, it takes a lot longer. And if you have a lot of things that you need to do, spend the time building trust with people around you first and foremost, and you'll be surprised how far you go.
Spending time building trust. Coming back to the earlier part of our discussion, we were talking about consultations and talking about building trust with the people with members of the community.
Yeah.
That's indeed very, very important. Someone from our audience is wondering, when can you challenge the status quo or be a disruptor within your organization? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, there's no when. You can always do it. It's the matter of how you do it. Like, you get to a place that I am, you might have the positional legitimacy to do it, but if people don't trust, or you make people retreat, then you're not going to be effective. Like, I think in terms of challenging status quo, there's an element of power in it, first and foremost, that you need to address, and you might be in a position of power position to do it. But I start with the belief that people are generally good. People want to get to the right things, do the right things, but things also have to be explained in a way that is safe and psychologically safe. Right now, we're doing this via Zoom, but over these last 3 years and just the general polarization of our world, it is hard to have psychological safe places that people can speak, regardless of position, speak openly about kind of things that they're feeling or they're thinking, and they don't think they're going to get castigated for that. Creating that kind of space while understanding, yeah, there are still boundaries, but this is where we're trying to go. So back to the inclusivity discussion, this is what the utility of this is, and this is what our culture is. But I'm just not going to start with the very angry and not angry, emotionally charged discussion in a way that isn't going to be leading to what the conclusion that I want. So if I want an outcome of, we want an inclusive space that people feel able to share, well, me saying you're a misogynist or a racist to start with, that's probably not going to get you there in terms of getting people to actually meaningfully engage in the conversation. So you can always do it. You can always challenge that status quo, but you're going to have to navigate into doing it in a way that's authentic to you. Then B, how are you doing it to meet the end result of what you're trying to get to? If the end result is we're just trying to have a fight over power, then there's a way you can do that. If the end result is we're trying to create an understanding and a shared understanding, and in general, just empathy for one another, then I think each of us as individuals can figure out how we're going to navigate that. But if we can create a shared empathy and understanding, the world is absolutely open, because now you have a human being who's sitting across from you, or in whatever, lunchroom, cafeteria, whatever it is, who is willing to hear a perspective that they themselves have never experienced. And what a gift that is to be able to share that with one another.
Has so far been incredible conversation, getting very positive feedback from everyone in the audience. Another question that we do have here is that we work in systems and bureaucracies that are Eurocentric and that have a long colonial history. Do we need to decolonize the way that we work? Do we need to change fundamentally how they work? What are your thoughts on all of this?
I would say that we probably need to change fundamentally how they work, but I would also say, and this is my experience, language like decolonize, if we don't have a shared understanding of what that means, it's only going to confuse people and get in the way of what that outcome is going to be. So, and this is my personal opinion, I think we can get to the same path by, I mean, organizations want to get to a more of a flat organization. That sounds like decolonization to me. That sounds like almost indigenous, like it's the same principles are there, but you can use language that's, I find, inclusive to bring people along. Yes, people read decolonize as I'm trying to remove you. Bring people along that we can make this a shared journey. Because at the heart of it, the utility is, and for when I think about this in terms of a flat organization, I'm able to source the genius from the people that I work with, and they have capacity to actually be engaged and drive the bus that we're collectively in. That's why we do it. So I have a more engaged employee, someone who's giving more themselves to the organization, someone who feels authentically included within the space, as opposed to a hierarchy that someone on Mount Pius or in an ivory tower that I'm in right now is making a decision that doesn't reflect what their experience is on the ground and is so very kind of disconnected. So if I can speak to what the point of that is, then that makes sense. In terms of like even a term that we use here in EPS in terms of indigenizing, understanding that we're on treaty land, that we have responsibilities, especially as law enforcement. There are functional things that we can take and implement within our culture in terms of, like I said, the flatness and trying to squish the hierarchy a bit. But there is also respect. And there is a utility in being respectful and building relationships with our Indigenous leaders and Indigenous community here in the city. That the utility is we're here on treaty land, and it's one thing to say a land acknowledgement. It's another thing to be able to actually build that in to a organization that has a historically fraught relationship with that community. There's a utility there. Like it can be a moral imperative and also useful and functional as we're trying to do our day-to-day duties.
Has your organization been successful in rebuilding and repairing that relationship with Indigenous communities?
I mean, success, there's no that would be another destination fallacy. So for us, trying to a continued effort and a markable difference or marked difference in the state. So things that we were doing before we're not, or things we weren't doing before, we're doing new steps, engaging with community councils, our Nisokamakoan Council, which is Cree, these are steps, but there is no mountaintop that I'm going to see. And that's fine, because if I can get people to understand that this is a perpetual journey, then the work is in the journey, not till we get to a point that whether it's with hiring, we're at X percentage within the service. Whoa, you know what? Reconciliation is done. No, that's not how it's going to go. So there are going to be ebbs and flows, but our perpetual commitment to working with community. Like one thing that we do here in my bureau is we have things called our help teams and even offender management. And what long or short of it is focusing on diverting people or away from the justice system, meeting their met needs and navigating them through the system. So whether it be social services, whether it be healthcare, et cetera, embedding Indigenous leadership on those teams of like officers and social workers and managers, embedding Indigenous leadership there goes a long way, because this was perpetually with a disproportionate representation of Indigenous folks who we do come in contact with. This was perpetually who we would be meeting. How can we now empower, and I pay these organizations to work with us to be able to help navigate people away from perpetual contact with police? So there's things that you could do like that. That's a very specific policing context, but you can do it across any organization. You just kind of have to have the will to do it, make the steps, and deal with the bumps in the road that are going to come. But it's a commitment to going on the journey, but we're not going to see the end.
It's a long-term journey. It's a long-term commitment to working with equity-seeking communities. In your day-to-day job, what are you seeing as skills that are, very important for public servants, and especially for newer public servants to master, so that they can, excel in their career?
I would say adaptability. So if you've entered the workforce in the last 4 years, 5 years, think about the world that you've lived in. From I was going at home and Skype was a thing that I used to talk to people back in Nigeria, to now we're having conferences via Zoom. So adaptability, the willingness to be able to navigate change, and navigate change in a way that isn't kind of disruptive. The next thing I would say is, and I keep hammering on this, but kindness and consistency. We have, and maybe this is me being pessimistic or self-loathing, but there's a talent bandwidth. There's going to be outliers, negatively or positively. What is going to separate you is consistently doing what you say you're going to do and how you treat people. So I think it's Charlie Munger, who partners with Warren Buffett, said, I don't have to be the best investor. And I'm going to butcher this, but the intent is here. I don't have to be the best investor. I just have to be on average better than you for a longer period of time. And in that variance is where the success is. The ability to be consistently good to people, the ability to be consistently reliable. Because being a public servant, your world is going to change. You think there's going to be some stability because there's some things that happen every year. Budget and the fiscal happens in March. Okay, there's a throne speech in October or November, and then you're seeing what the new, if you're in government, you're seeing what the new direction is going to be. But within that, you might be working in highways 1 year, and then in 5 years, you're in policing, or in 5 years, you're in economic development. Those things are going to change, and you're going to have to figure out new jobs. But if you are mastering how you treat people, boy, though, your name is going to move further than your resume and way further than your resume if you can do that. Anyone coming into the workforce now, kindness, persistence, consistency, and being persistent about the work, that goes a long way. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm telling you, I'm not like some super outlier, and I'm here having this conversation with y'all, so you can do it as well. The last thing is also weaponizing, golly, using positive gossip. And what this is if you are hearing that someone is speaking kindly about another human being, let them know. So I was, and this is a quick aside, I was at the throne speech yesterday, and I was sitting next to someone who was speaking about a particular minister she had worked for. She's moved on, and how kind that minister was and how attentive to their portfolio. I ran into the minister later and just said, hey, by the way, this person, unsolicited, doesn't know that we know each other, was speaking so very kindly about you, about your attention to detail, but the way you cared about the folks within the portfolio, almost brought her to tears. And in a world that we're so ready to see outrage and negativity, whether it be on that hellscape that's Twitter or anywhere else, being able to connect with other human beings and tell them the positive things that are happening in the world, what you do for that human, that is going to, like, what you reap, you are going to sow. That is going to come back to you, because I would rather be thought of as a person who spreads good news, makes other people feel good. Guess who they're going to think about when it comes back to, this is something that I want to do, or this is an incredible opportunity? Who's top of mind? That person who I know that engages in small p politics, or that person who I see to be competent and I like being around that person?
Indeed, adaptability to change, consistency, reliability, using positive gossip, and kindness. Kindness is so important, and thank you so much for highlighting that. We've almost reached the end of our discussion. Do you have any closing words, anything you'd like to still share with the audience?
No, outside of thank you very much. I'm sure I can be long-winded. I'm just on this journey like you folks. So these are things that I've experienced, that some have been successful. It hasn't, and it won't always be easy, but making sure you take time to regulate and master yourself, you build that immune system, you're going to be ready for whatever success comes your way. So if you can if you can just spend time being kind to one another, it seems like a something very simple, but to do that consistently is very hard, but you will benefit and you will make an impact on the people who are around you. And that's really all you can ask for in your time here. So thank you folks very much.
Thank you so much, Enyinnah, for sharing all of that with us. You know, taking the time to share all of your thoughts, reminding us to be kind, reminding us that we should, regulate ourselves. And I think we will be now taking a 10-minute break to allow us to regulate ourselves. So it is a perfect timing in our discussion. I will pass it back to David Fulford to continue to take it from here.
Well, thanks very much to both of you. That was an inspiring start to our day, and so much to be shared. A couple of questions that did come up during that is, are we going to share the recording? And yes, we will. So that will come out a little later. Again, thanks to both of you for sharing so much and for taking all the questions. I've written down so many notes. I'm going to have to follow up with you because I've got some great ideas for things that maybe we'll do in the future. So let's take a break and let's reconvene at 12:30. So grab a drink, a bite to eat, and we'll see everybody back here at 12:30. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, folks.